Assalamualaikum and good day to our respective panels, Dr. Khairia and Encik Muhammad Faiz. We are from Bachelor Administrative Science, AM 228, and my name is Nur Shahira binti Muhammad Wahizan.
And my name is Nur Alia Khairani binti Muhammad.
So today, we are going to present our research. The title is The Governance Practices of Company Limited by Guarantee in Selangor and Kuala Lumpur, Analysis in Decision Making, Regulatory Compliance and Disclosure.
Research background. So according to Bradash, Journey and Stone 2008, MPO are obligated to fulfill their promised result and serve their beneficiary to meet the community challenge and to align them with their mission statement. According to Balzer and Murkowski 2005, at that MPO are also known as preservation and the public goods. There are three factors that influence the governance practices in this research. The first one are decision making, the second one are regulatory compliance, and the last one is disclosure. This study was conducted to see the relationship between the factors and the governance practices in CLBG in Selangor and Kuala Lumpur.
Problem statement. According to COLE 2015, there is a minimal research information on the level of governance of non-profit entities as opposed to the stock exchange listed firms. It was also mentioned by Klassen 2000 and Abdullah 2016 that lack of governance practices has adversely affected the performance of Malaysian CLBG, lead to a number of Malaysian CLBG companies having a higher leverage and higher proportion of short-term debt and financial distress. Prior to the objective of this study, it is to determine the factors between the good governance practices for business performance in company limited by guarantee sector. Therefore, we have came up with three research questions, which is there any significant relationship between decision making, regulatory compliance, disclosure towards good governance practices for business performance in company limited by guarantee sector? Research questions is actually a reflection from the research objective.
Research objective. Our research objective consists of three, which is the first one is to examine whether there is a significant relationship between the decision making of board directors and the good governance practices of company limited by guarantee. For the second one is to determine whether there is a significant relationship between the regulatory compliance of CCM and good governance practices for business performance in CLBG sector. Last but not least is to identify whether there is a significant relationship between disclosure of annual reports and the good governance practices for CLBG sector. So moving on to our conceptual framework. So our conceptual framework consists of two parts, which is independent variable and dependent variable. So under the independent variable, we have decision making, regulatory compliance, and disclosure. For dependent variable, we have good governance practices for the CLBG. So for example of our independent variable is decision making. So Sumaira and Mochi 2016 stated that various activities and methods can influence in creating effective governance practices, and in the exact knowledge in roles and board process can ensure an effective business performance by the board of directors as group. So we found that an organization with a strategic decision making and good governance practices can offer a beneficial effect towards the organization, and this is why we proposed the following hypothesis.
For the second objective is to determine whether there is a significant relationship between regulatory compliance of CCM and governance practices for business performance in company limited by guarantee sector. We employ the cross-step chi-square, and our result has discovered that there is no significant relationship between regulatory compliance and governance practices, with x-square value 27.619 and p-value with significant level more than 0.276. Therefore, H null 2 are accepted and HA2 are rejected. The last objective is to identify whether there is a significant relationship between disclosure of an annual report and governance practices for business performance in company limited by guarantee sector. We employ the Pearson correlation, and our result has discovered that there is a significant relationship between disclosure and governance practices, with the R value of 0.614 and P value which significant level less than 0.004. Therefore, HA3 are accepted and H null 3 are rejected. Next, we will move to the research methodology. The first one is the research design. In this study, we use the cross-sectional design by using quantitative method. The primary data of this survey involving the selected company limited by guarantee in Selangor and Kuala Lumpur. We also use their latest annual report as the primary data. The unit of analysis that we use in this study involving the selected company of limited by guarantee in Selangor and Kuala Lumpur. For the sample size of this study with a total number of selected company limited by guarantee in Selangor and Kuala Lumpur was 20 companies. The sampling technique used in this study is non-probability sampling technique, which is purposive sampling. The chosen number of population is based on the researcher judgment, which the population chosen has shown the interest of the researcher itself. This technique is suitable for small sample size and obtain limited number of primary data resources in the study. The data measurement for this study for the questions from section B, D, and E, which is decision making, disclosure, and governance practices, was measured by using Likert scale consists of strongly agree, agree, disagree, and strongly disagree. For the section C, which is regulatory compliance, was measured by 2-point choices between the yes and no. The data collection of this study, the proposed questionnaire will cover 5 sections, which is A, B, C, D, and E. We use the Google form as the main platform, and we distribute the questionnaire using email and WhatsApp. For the data analysis, we use SPSS as our tools to finalize our results. For demographic profile, we measure by using frequency and percentage, while for hypothesis, we measure by using Pearson correlation for decision-making and disclosure variables, while regulatory compliance variable, we measure by using crosstab chi-square.
So now moving on, we are on demographic finding. So we have consist of 30 findings. So the first one will begin with the principal activities. They are divided into profit, non-profit, and charity. Non-profit has the highest level of percentages, which is 70.0%. For nature of business, education has the highest numbers of percentages, which is 35.0%. For getting donation, has divided into yes and no answer, and they are equally has the same percentage, which is 50.0%. Same goes to tax deductible, which has the same amount of percentage, which is 50.0%. However, tax exemption, yes, has the highest percentages, which is 75.0%. For the number 6, total of members, 2 to 9 has the highest rate of percentages, which is 50.0%. For number 7, the type of member, organization/corporate, has the highest percentages, which is 60.0%. For point number 8, is the total of employee, has more than 20%, has the highest percentage, which is 65.0%. For number 9, total of volunteer, none has contributed to the highest level of percentage, which is 60.0%. For the 10th point is total of board director. 2 to 3 numbers are 40.0 percentage. For another demographic finding, for the 11th point is total of non-executive. None also has contributed to the highest level of percentage, which is 80.0%. For number 12 is total of executive. None also has contributed to an highest number of percentage, which is 54.0%. So last but not least, does board have community? Yes, has contributed to a highest number of percentage, which is 70.0%. That's all for demographic finding.
This is our hypothesis testing. As you can see, at our first objective is to examine whether there is a significant relationship between decision-making of board directors and governance practices for business performance in company limited by guarantee sector. We employ the Pearson correlation, and the result has discovered that there is a significant relationship between decision-making and governance practices with R value of 0.789 and P value with the significant level less than 0.000. Therefore, we accepted the HA1 and rejected H-null1. For the second objective is to determine whether there is a significant relationship between regulatory compliance of CCM and governance practices for business performance in company limited by guarantee sector. We employ the cross-step chi-square, and our result has discovered that there is no significant relationship between regulatory compliance and governance practices with X square value 27.619 and P value with significant level more than 0.276. Therefore, H-null2 are accepted and HA2 are rejected. The last objective is to identify whether there is a significant relationship between disclosure of an annual report and governance practices for business performance in company limited by guarantee sector. We employ the Pearson correlation, and our result has discovered that there is a significant relationship between disclosure and governance practices with the R value of 0.614 and P value which significant level less than 0.004. Therefore, HA3 are accepted and H-null3 are rejected. Next, we will move to the limitation of the study. So the first point is the limited sample. The total number of samples in this study are quite limited. It is because due to this pandemic COVID-19, we had the difficulties and limitation to approach the companies. The next point is the limited model. The total number of models in this study are limited. It is because we only have 3 independent variables and 1 dependent variable. Actually, there is a lot of others variable can be used in this study. The last limitation of the study is the quality of the respondent. As I mentioned before, due to this pandemic COVID-19, we had a few difficulties to approach the companies. So we can't really guarantee or be sure that the quality respondent can be achieved.
So for recommendation, we have 2 points that we have discovered in order to be used for future study. For the first one is to increase the number of the variable. There are 4 main variables that we have chose to be tested in this study. However, the number of variables is very insufficient because to measure the real most influence factors in governance practices of CLBG in Selangor and Kuala Lumpur, restriction numbers of variables may actually lead to a bias. As a result, the respondents are provided with few choices only. This is because the judgment are only bound towards the factors that we have select. Hence, we believe that by increasing the number of the variable can generate a better result and outcome in the future. For the second point is to increase a large sample size. One of the recommendations for the future study is to increase the sample size. The sample size of this study is only consists of 20 respondents, whereby they are required to answer a set of questionnaire just to get a result of the study. This is insufficient to measure the sample size of company limited by guarantee in Selangor and Kuala Lumpur by only using 20 respondents. Therefore, we believe that a larger sample size is better in order to get a more precise and accurate finding regarding in this study. That's all for recommendation. Thank you. Conclusion. So, in conclude that the study has investigated the most significant factors of good governance practices of CLBG in Selangor and Kuala Lumpur. The research objectives were achieved. The result of the study proved that appropriate disclosure level and quality of decision making are the main important elements for achieving good governance practice. This is because the role of the board members will determine the organization business performance. In addition, a strategic decision-making by the board of directors usually determines the overall direction of the company that can seriously affect the quality of effectiveness of the company performance. Last but not least, proper disclosure of annual reports and audited final statement is an element in accounting that can determine the organization performance and goal. Therefore, by complying with these good governance practices by CCM, it will provide a guarantee for stakeholders and also obtain the trust of the public towards the CLBG performance and activities in Selangor and Kuala Lumpur.